Hello and welcome to this walkthrough of Othello by William Shakespeare. My name is David Kinder. We're going to be using the new Cambridge Shakespeare version of the play, which is now in its third edition. It looks like this, and you can get it in all good bookshops, etc., etc. It's a really good academic edition, and it's got lots of really good notes, really good critical approaches to the text, lots of context. We will be using the notes from time to time, which you can see here at the bottom of this online version. But primarily my job here is to walk you through the text so that you really do understand it. The point of, Shakespeare can be quite dense, and it can be quite hard to process. And these videos hopefully will open a few things up. I'm not going to interpret the text for you and tell you what it, how to actually interpret the characters, how to interpret the themes, all that sort of thing. That's obviously for you and for your teachers and lecturers and so on. I'm going to be reading quite a lot of it, not trying to give you a full kind of dramatic rendition, but just to give you some sense of what the lines might mean when they're spoken, give you more of a sense of what these characters are saying to each other, and to open it up. Okay, let's begin. So we have Roderigo and Iago entering on stage. Roderigo is a gentleman of Venice, and Iago is a soldier, and as we shall discover in a little while, he has been overlooked for promotion. He wanted to be the lieutenant to Othello, who is a general. He wanted that job and he hasn't got it, so he's cross. But actually, when we begin here, it's Roderigo who's most angry. He begins with tush, which is just an exclamation of disapproval for the period, for God's sake, or damn it. Never tell me. He's basically saying there, you can't tell me, you can't honestly tell me that this is, that, and I take it really much unkindly. I think you are mean and cruel, and unjust, Iago. You, who have had my purse as if the strings were thine. In other words, you've had hold of my money, of my wallet, as if it belonged to you, and you could spend my money however you like. Shouldst know of this. And then we're immediately saying to ourselves, well, what is this? Well, we're about to find out. Blood. Now this is short, as you can see in the notes here, for Christ's blood. So it's a pretty strong curse word at the time. You can insert whatever kind of modern, really strong swear word you can think of here. So he's kind of raising his register, how annoyed he is really to Roderigo's level, and maybe even topping him. But you will not hear me, you will not listen to me. If ever I did dream of such a matter, if ever I even imagined that this should happen, and didn't tell you, well, you have every right to abhor me, to hate me. Roderigo, thou toldst me, thou didst hold him in thy hate. You told me you hated Othello. Well, despise me, you can hate me if I do not hate Othello, says Iago. Notice at this point, and thus far, Othello's name actually has not been mentioned. It's worth just having a look actually to see, as you go through the first scene, the first point at which Othello's name comes up. And this is where Iago actually now starts to talk about his own problems and his own issues, and you will probably find that this is quite useful when you are studying the play, and when you're talking about the character of Iago, and when you're thinking about what are his motives for the evil actions that he's responsible for in the play. 3 great ones of the city, says Iago. So these are great people, these are high up people in the city, in the main kind of establishment, in the elite, if you like, of Venice, in personal suit, so making a personal case on Iago's behalf to make Iago lieutenant, to make Iago Othello's lieutenant, off cap to him. So they took their caps off. They, if you like, lobbied Othello. And by the faith of man, says Iago, but if we have any faith in mankind, I suppose how you would read that, I know my price. I know I am worth no worse a place. He feels like lieutenant is the job that he's perfectly worthy to take. Do notice, by the way, price and worth and everything else that you hear Iago say in relation to money and material wealth. There's a big, long run later on when he's talking to Roderigo, when he says, put money in thy purse. It's not the first and it's not the last time he will talk about things in these kind of quite material terms. But he, says Iago, talking again about Othello, as loving his own pride and purposes, so as being kind of full of himself, he evades them with a bombast circumstance. So Othello evades them. He kind of won't listen to these great ones of the city, and instead talks with a bombast circumstance. So this is kind of rhetorical and puffed up and full of hot air, horribly stuffed with epithets of war. So apparently, according to Iago, Othello is talking in lots and lots of very kind of dense, warlike and military imagery, to say, in conclusion, he non-suits my mediators, says Iago. Non-suits, in other words, he kind of bats off their case. They are mediating on Othello, on Iago's behalf, and he bats off their case, and he says, for certainly, says he, I have already chosen my officer. And what was he? Now we have a rhetorical question there that is posed by Iago to Roderigo, which of course he will go right on and answer. It's worth noting that in this text and in all texts really of Shakespeare, where the lines are not completed, this is an interesting thing to note whenever we are talking in blank verse. Blank verse being, as I'm sure you will know and have learnt about, basically lines that are roughly 10 syllables long, usually with the stress on the second of each pair of 5 syllables. But generally speaking, we tend to see blank verses quite close to speech, but it is quite worth knowing. It's quite worth thinking about where it is that blank verse is used. And when a line that should be 10 syllables long is not completed, you can usually suggest that the actor there is doing something with the line, is kind of doing some stage business or whatever. So he asks this rhetorical question. Forsooth, he answers himself, a great arithmetician. This is basically saying that Cassio is, all of this here is saying that Cassio is essentially really just a kind of theoretical soldier, an arithmetician, somebody who can make calculations, I guess, who can do things in kind of an academic way, but that's about it. He's one Michael Cassio, a Florentine, and Florentine's quite interesting in itself. It suggests usually something to do with well, apparently it was quite a strong financial area, so it might suggest, for example, that again, he's more like a banker, more like an accountant than he is a proper soldier, a fellow almost damned in a fair wife. And as you'll see in the notes at the bottom, there is a heck of a lot to be said about that line. I might leave most of that for you. Perhaps you could read those later at your leisure, because in some ways it is saying that he's damned in a fair wife, almost in the sense that if he's got a fair wife, he's not going to be able to keep her, because I suppose he's such a nerd. And yet actually later on you will discover that Cassio is painted by Iago as quite a smoothie, so I don't know, maybe there's some contradictions there. That never set a squadron in the field, somebody who hasn't actually been properly into battle, and doesn't even know the division of a battle, i.e., how you divide up warring armies, more than a spinster. Now, a spinster is an unmarried woman. It is a word that still rarely, but it is still used. I'd say probably would be quite a pejorative, quite a negative word used in a modern context. And here, in this particular context, he's basically saying, he's kind of emasculating Cassio to Roderigo for effect. Essentially saying, he's kind of not a proper soldier, he's not a proper man, really, unless the bookish theoric, unless you're going to say, that's what Iago is saying here, that a theoretical approach is the one that you're looking for. And if that's the case, well, the togaed consuls. So that's the kind of, you think of people like in a kind of Roman centre of a Roman city, walking around in their togas, talking at great length about battles in theory rather than in practice, and they could be just as masterly as he. They're just as good as he is, frankly. Mere prattle without practice is all his soldiership. It's all to do with, it's all talk, and there's not much action. But he, Cassio, had the election, right? He got the job of lieutenant, and I, says Iago, of whom Othello's eyes had seen the proof at Rhodes, the proof of his soldiership, is of him as a man of action at Rhodes, at Cyprus, and on other grounds, other battlegrounds, Christian and heathen. So don't forget that the Venetians, of whom Iago is one and Rodrigo is one, would be Christian, and all other faiths, all other cultures would therefore be heathen. Certainly to the high up in society. That's not to say that Venice wasn't quite a cosmopolitan city. Indeed it was, and would have had lots of religions there. But essentially that's the thing. And they would be battling against people of a different religion and culture to themselves. I must be lead and calmed, right? Lead and calm. Now, if you're in the lee of a ship, basically that ship is coming past you and taking all of your wind if you're in a sailing boat, yes? So that's what's happened to Iago, he's basically saying. I've basically kind of had all the wind that was in my sails blocked from me. And by whom? By debitor and creditor, yes? By this countercaster. So this is somebody who's not just a kind of theoretician only, and somebody who kind of adds things up and kind of presumably can work everything out on paper. He's a countercounter. I mean, a modern version of that probably would be like a bean counter. He, in good time, like, hey presto, must his lieutenant be. Apparently, apparently this is the situation. And I, God bless the mark, which I would take to mean something like, for God's sake, his moorship's ancients. It's quite an interesting thing. So ancient is basically a standard bearer, and his moorship is a play on worship. Obviously your worship would be something you would say to somebody who you were talking to, who was more elevated than you, so it would be a mark of great respect. The fact that he's put more in front of a ship instead of were in front of ship, moorship instead of worship, is deliberately kind of making fun, I suppose, of Othello, calling him a Moor. You'll notice again he still hasn't been called by his name, and depending on how it's used, the Moors were a particular culture who inhabited most of kind of North Africa, parts of Spain and so on. They were Muslim, Islamic, and culturally quite diverse, and so in that sense, the attitude of somebody in Venice to them might have been, well, I don't know how you put it really, skeptical, I guess, to say the least, or put it like that. And he uses this term about Othello a heck of a lot. By heaven, says Rodrigo, I would rather have been his hangman. There's a sense here, I think, in which he's kind of joining in with Iago and almost suggesting, yes, that the best thing to happen to Othello, that he should be killed. Why, there's no remedy, says Iago. There's nothing you can do about it. Sorry. It is the curse of service. It is just what happens when you serve other people in this day and age. Preferment goes by letter and affection. So promotion goes by letter and affection. Another sort of nod and a wink, by contacts, we call it now probably, the old boys network it used to be called, and not by the old gradation. In other words, not by merit, not by working your way up steadily, step by step up the ladder, where each second stood heir to the first. So that's this idea that, you get to stage 1, and then from there you can get to stage 2 and so on. Now, sir, he says to Rodrigo, be judge yourself whether I am, in any just term, am affined, yes, am inclined, if you like, to love the Moor. Says Rodrigo, says, well, I would not follow him then. And Iago replies, oh, sir, content you, don't you worry. I follow him to serve my turn upon him. I follow him basically to ultimately get the better of him. Okay, and that's the end of our first part of this Othello walkthrough. So this is Act 1, Scene 1, Part 1. We've only got in by about just over 40 lines, of course, but when we get cracking, I reckon we should be able to cover about 100 lines in a 15-minute video, because I won't need to do the introduction. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you found it useful, and I look forward to seeing you and talking to you next time. Thanks very much.